Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Fulco. I'm the Agnita M Stine Schreiber Curator at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts in Hagerstown, Maryland. And I'm glad that you could all join us tonight. Thank you very much for coming. And I have a special guest with me tonight, Heather Semple, whom I will introduce in just a couple minutes. But before we start, I just want to take a moment to tell you about a couple of upcoming things happening at the museum. Tonight's program focuses on our special exhibition, which is the focus of our discussion tonight, Landscapes and Legends of Norway, William Singer and His Contemporaries, which is on view through September 17th. And we encourage you to come and see this wonderful exhibition that features work by our museum founder, William Singer, during his time in Norway and the work of his friends and contemporaries. So what's coming up at the museum related to that is on Saturday, July 15th, just a couple of weeks from now, a program in which young children have the opportunity to illustrate mythological creatures in a comic book style manner called Bringing Beasts, and that will be from 11 to 2 p.m. And then we also have our summer camp that will be held from July 17th to 21. Monday through Friday, called Little Vikings, and it's open to children ages 8 to 12. In addition to that, we also have another special exhibition called Treasures of State, Maryland's Art Collection, which is on view through October 22nd, and it features more than 90 American and European artworks from the collection of the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts and the Maryland State Archives, an artistic property in Annapolis. So we encourage you to come and see that show as well. And coming up for that on July 8th is a watercolor illustration workshop in which you have the opportunity to explore the eclectic architecture of Maryland with artist Seth Holmes. And then Saturday, August 5th from 11 to 3 p.m. is our Treasures of State Community Day, in which people have the chance to celebrate the history of Maryland with kids' crafts, living history, food vendors, and a lot more. So I encourage you to look on our website at these programs, which are listed there. Also, they will be announced on our Facebook page. And we got a lot of exciting things coming up this summer. So it is my great pleasure to welcome to tonight's program Heather Semple, who has been in the field of fine arts for the last 30 years. She's worked as a curator, an advisor, and appraiser of 3 large art collections. She's based in the Pittsburgh area, and her current business that she owns is ECI Art and Travel, which offers fine arts appraisals, private art collection management, PowerPoint art history presentations, and regional arts tours. She's also the Pittsburgh representative for Freeman's Auctions Philadelphia, referring estate collections. So Heather, thank you so much for joining me tonight. We had tonight our usual co-host Sarah Hall, our executive director, was unable to come. She's visiting with family and taking some much-deserved time off, but we will. She's with us in spirit. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm so pleased and delighted to be here. Very honored. I'd like to thank the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts, particularly, and Sarah for all of her works. I've known her well in Pittsburgh, and anybody that went to the Frick knew that Sarah was the curator there for many years, so we admire all her work. But I especially thank you, Daniel, for inviting me tonight and for your vast knowledge of the Singer paintings and his contemporaries. It's been a joy to see the exhibit with you, and tonight I hope that we can shed some more information to a wider audience and provoke some questions. So thank you, appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Heather, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's wonderful to have you here. Before we launch into things, I just wanted to ask you, so that we could start things off this way, what is your relationship to William Singer?
William Singer, or Uncle Billy, as our family refers to him, was my great uncle. So his father was my great grandfather. And I am so pleased to learn more about his life as I go along. And I mostly am here tonight to supply the family myth that I can add to Daniel's great presentation. But lots of stories, and we've tried to validate them. Sometimes the dates are off by 1 or 2 years, or there's some stories behind the scenes, but that's how I'm related to William Henry Singer Jr.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to have a descendant of the artist here on the program. This is really special. You have stories about the family and about William, and as we go through tonight, I'm looking forward to hearing them and also your insights. So here we go. I'm just going to share my screen with everybody. And here we are. And as many of you know, William Henry Singer and Anna Bruce Singer founded the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts between 1928 and 29, and we opened to the public in 1931. And this exhibition celebrates the legacy of William and Anna and their artist friends. So tonight we'll be exploring lots of different things related to both art, the history of the museum, and also the world of our founders. And here they are in a really charming photograph that has been published numerous times and just shows that loving bond between the two of them, taken in their later years. And of course, we wouldn't have the museum without them. As you see here on the front page of the Baltimore Sun, back in 1932, it shows the museum. Here are the various county officials who were part of the grand opening of that. And then it was written up here in the Baltimore Sun. And at that time, a number of William's paintings, his large landscapes that we're going to be looking at tonight, were displayed in the Tall Gallery, or Gallery for Tall Works, or it's also called the Sculpture Court. Originally, when the museum was founded, we had 100 works that formed the basis of the collection, donated by Anna and William. Anna Singer was a native of Hagerstown, and this exhibition celebrates their work together in terms of bringing this museum to us. As we go through tonight, you'll also hear about their legacy as it spread to other parts of the world, particularly the Netherlands and also Norway. Before we get into more detail, these are just a couple of gallery shots that show you the show. If you come into the museum, you will see here in the Bayer Gallery, the exhibition begins with this really beautiful portrait. We'll talk about that more afterwards. And also a really nice selection of archival material, photographs. We have a couple of pastel paintings that are on view in there, as well as drawings. In addition to being a painter, William Singer was also a very good draftsman, and he often worked in chalk and pastels for his works on paper that include a calendar. And here's some of that archival material to place him and Anna and their circle in historic context. The exhibition continues in the Bowman Concert Gallery, which contains numerous works by William, his landscapes, on several of the walls. And then on one of the other larger walls is a selection of watercolors, 13 scenes from Norse mythology that were done by Frank Morse Rummel, whose work occupies the other large half of the exhibition. I should also mention tonight, we're going to discuss the slides and works of art. And once we've concluded, we will open up the program to discussion. So we just ask that you hold any questions you may have until the end tonight. The exhibition also contains some portraiture in terms of the portrait of William Singer himself, and then the landscapes by their contemporaries. There's a sculpture here and also this portrait that we'll talk more about. But first, we wanted to give you some background information about William Singer and also Anna. Anna Brew was born in Hagerstown in 1873, and she grew up on Dunirvin Drive and married William, who came from Pittsburgh, in 1895. This is their wedding photograph here. And this is the house that she grew up in, which is very close to us. And here is William in his studio. And he started out his life in Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh. There's a larger view of Anna's house that you can still see today. And there's a view of our museum if you walk around the park just outside of it. It's a beautiful setting. But the setting in which William grew up was quite different at the time. And it was something that particularly the city of Pittsburgh was had a lot of pollution, as you can see here, right, Heather? We're looking at here, you probably know better than I, the exact part of town here. Is this a view of?
Yes, that's the from Allegheny City, what they called it was actually two cities on here, and that's the Allegheny River in between, and then the other side is the Pittsburgh going towards the point where the Monongahela and Allegheny joined to form the Ohio. But Billy grew up in Allegheny City at the time. It was annexed from the city of Pittsburgh.
I see. And here he is very young here with his dog. And he really had a lifetime attachment to dogs. Is that correct, Heather? He had English Spaniels or similar breeds?
Yes, his whole life. And I just blanked on the name of this dog, but it was dear to him for his whole life. But you're right, he kept replacing him with the same breed throughout his life.
That's very nice. We'll see that as we go through other photographs of the Singers tonight. And at the time, Singer, in order to escape this pollution, he would have needed to go out into the countryside, into places like the Laurel Highlands, to seek inspiration from nature. And some of the earliest artists he came into contact with were a number of artists of the scalp level group or school, such as George Hetzel. This painting here in the Westmoreland Museum of American Art, the style very much that of the Hudson River School, which was very popular in America from the early to mid and just around the late 19th century, but really its heyday is the mid 19th. And here's a photograph showing that artist George Hetzel and his colleagues sketching outdoors. This is a really neat photo. You can imagine some of William's earliest art experiences being something like this, I think, Heather.
Yes, that's right. I think you have a picture maybe later when he's at Monhegan where he's sketching outside. And this is in a private collection in Pittsburgh, a beautiful watercolor actually of the Laurel Highlands where he was working and painting. Began his career really.
And I think that it's at this time that he really begins to develop an interest in landscape painting. It's interesting because as time goes on, he really wants to get as far away from Pittsburgh as he can. A little bit of an aside, one of the houses that belonged to, I believe it was William's uncle, John, if I'm not mistaken, was this house called Old Singer Place in Wilkinsburg section of town, which has been turned into an Airbnb, but is standing there. And just bring this in as a bit of extra information. It's a really beautiful Gothic revival house. And in terms of where William grew up, Heather and I were talking about this. I believe the house he grew up in is no longer standing, or it was replaced. So this is really quite beautiful, but it gives you a sense of the Singer family's wealth that they had. And this is something that William is going to inherit. And here we come to some of these really well-heeled Pittsburghers. And here is William's father, William Henry Singer, with that large mustache. And other notable Pittsburghers as well. There's Charles Schwab. We have a number of other people. I believe Henry Clay Frick is here as well. Yes, there he is.
Yes.
This would have been his father's orbit, and these are the magnates of the day. You may have some other insights or things you might want to add, Heather.
Well, this book is so charming that it's Palmer's Pictorial Pittsburgh and Prominent Pittsburghers. And they listed from the late 1758 to 1905. But it's fun. They have these little cameos of Pittsburghers famous in the day. This is obviously the end of the 1800s, but it's fun to see that and know what they looked like in real time.
And this is one of the Singer's country homes. So this might have been a place where William could have gone to sort of escape Edge Hill Manor in Sewickley. But the Edge Hill is no longer standing. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, built by Longfellow, Alden, and Harlow, as noted here in 1905. It has been raised. The water tower and the stable still remain, and carriage house. But this main building has been raised. This was actually the wedding of Billy Singer's sister Valletta, and this was pictured. It's actually in the Edgeworth area of Pittsburgh.
And then where William had his first studio was here at Hillcrest, and that is still standing. And
correct, that is standing, and there is a studio adjacent to it that is standing. Has just been made into a separate home.
And the Fricks did know the Singers. In fact, this cup here was a gift from the Fricks to the Singers for their wedding anniversary. So that demonstrates a direct connection to them, and hence the photo. But here's as Heather was saying, the photograph of the studio in winter. And here's Anna sitting in it in about 1905 to 1906. This is a really neat shot of her. On one of their return trips to America. And in that period between 1900 and 1908, they really were back and forth a lot, weren't they, Heather?
They were. They kind of were going to Paris and then came back, and they moved to Holland, and they were on Monhegan Island also, which you'll probably speak about. But yeah, so that's all part of it.
Yes, and the business that William's father was in was Singer Nimick and Company. And these are some photos that show you the factory that he ran. Hammered and rolled fine crucible cast steel. And this is where the fortune was made. Manufacturing armaments for the Civil War. And also it is shown in a couple of prints. Heather, you supplied some neat photos. Are these from the Duquesne Club or elsewhere in Pittsburgh?
This particular rendition is in the Duquesne Club. They were lithographs that John Palmatieri created in, if you can believe it, 1863. And he has labeled all of the businesses at the time that were in the Pittsburgh area, hoping to sell these as almost corporate art so that people could say we're part of the Industrial Revolution here beginning. But this is the Singer Nimick plant that was on what we call the north side. So it's actually on across from the point of Pittsburgh. As I mentioned, the three rivers come together on the Monongahela side, right? And then this is what it looked like at the time. So, and then this is another lithograph of the same image, but in much better condition. This is owned by a private corporation, and the colors, this was rolled up and kept, so that it's in pristine condition. But you can also see the factory in the lower left-hand quadrant, and it's a beautiful rendition of Pittsburgh that's cherished, again from 1863, and they were able to date it with the small steam boats that are there.
And here we can see it in that detail, and the kinds of armaments they would have produced are similar to these types of cannons at the time. And then I believe it wasn't the company later sold.
That's right. That's right. And the crucible steel was also part of the building of the Homestead Works, but Carnegie purchased it, and he then when he purchased it, Singer decided instead of taking a cash payout that he would take the equivalent in stocks. So technically he became one of the several partners of Carnegie. And then subsequently when it was sold through the overnight, when there was several millionaires made, I think his stocks were $50,000 at the time, and that translated it into several $1 million when Carnegie was purchased by, I think it was J.P. Morgan, 1901. So, and a good friend of Carnegie's, and of course of Frick, and was involved in the Homestead strike as well.
Yes, and there's an interesting anecdote related to Andrew Carnegie that he had supposedly mentioned during a transatlantic crossing. He encountered William's father on the ship, and he said, and I quote, "It would be unjust to keep this talent," and he's referring to William Jr.'s talent, "cooped up in a factory instead of giving it the chance of free development." And I thought this was an interesting statement because we sort of have an endorsement here from a major industrialist and figure and philanthropist at the time who had seen William's work as a young man and said that this guy really has talent, and you should let him paint. And as we read about William in his younger years, his father didn't really support this. He wanted him to be an executive in the company. Right, Heather? Not so much going off and living an artist's life.
That's right. And then when the company was sold to Carnegie, Carnegie kept an eye on his work, and then he was in the 1900 Carnegie International exhibit. Two of his works, Singer's works, were in there. So this conversation allegedly took place after that in 1901 when they were both journeying to Scotland together on a ship. And I think they were headed to Skibo, which is Andrew Carnegie's castle there. And I've been able to trace back the guest book to that encounter from 1901 where the senior Singer has signed in. But so apparently it gives a little bit more credibility to the statement. We always thought it was family myth that Andrew Carnegie had said that. But thank you, Daniel, for trying to, corroborate that for us.
Sure. No, it's very interesting because this is at a time where William's sort of trying to figure out, what he wants to do. He knows that something with art, and this is what he runs with. It's what he goes with. And it was interesting also reading that his mother, William's mother, wanted him to do this, but at first, father was skeptical, raised objections. So his mother, Hester Laird Harton, was her name. So in his early years, Singer, he takes lessons from an artist who becomes his friend and mentor named Martin Borgord, who's depicted down here in a portrait by American Impressionist Richard Miller. And Borgord has a significant impact on him. He really encourages him in his studies, as at the time, Martin was the director of the Allegheny Art School. That's a photograph showing a live model class there in Pittsburgh, with an early watercolor that's in the West Norway Museum of Decorative Arts in Bergen, which was also given donations by the Singers, by Anna much later, showing sheep. And he liked to work at a place, I believe, called Rose Point, that's shown in this photo. And he begins to really sort of develop a passion for landscape. And these are some really nice photos that show Martin and then William. This is from a bit later when it's Martin who introduces William and Anna to Norway. And here's Martin here, and there are the dogs, in this case, probably for hunting, and there's William by his side. That's a really neat photo. And then we have here a really nice bronze. In addition to being a painter, Martin Borgord is also a sculptor. And we also have that sculpture from our collection that's in the exhibition. This is a great photograph of him holding a pipe, dressed very well. And then also, Heather, this portrait that you brought to my attention of William's father from much later.
Yes, this was, we think, both Daniel and I were studying the signature. We think it's 1906 because that's when Martin returned to Pittsburgh to again teach. He was a juror in the Carnegie International and teach at what was known as Carnegie Institute at the time. So he did this portrait of William Henry Singer Sr. And it's interesting to see how he captures. You can see from the photograph, from the image that Daniel shared at the beginning, how well it's done. I mean, it really does capture his likeness. Great painting.
Yes. And Martin, I should point out, was born in Norway. So he's a Norwegian American. He immigrates here. and he has a significant impact on William's work. These are some of his early ones. Over there is Alfred Bryan Wall, another Western Pennsylvania artist who also depicted sheep. So William sort of goes through a series of, if you will, youthful works, doing landscape, some still life. But he really has an attachment to the landscape. And these early ones are really beautiful. He even made some aquatint etchings at the time that you can see here. He's trying to work out his style. And then in 1900, as Heather mentioned before, he goes to Monhegan Island in Maine. And there he really sort of cements his passion for nature, the outdoors, and depicting landscape. And this is really an important journey for him as he's going to go to Europe the following year, 1901. And he said there, until 1901, when I started for Paris, I existed only. From that time, a chance was given to me to live. And this is sort of pointing out his encounter with the art form that he's really going to focus on throughout his career. And this is one of those beautiful landscapes from the Monhegan period, beach at Monhegan, that's in the Singer-Lauren. This is just beautiful. It's really wonderful, as is this sunset scene here. But when he's in Paris, he studies with a very famous history painter named Jean-Paul Laurence, or J.P. Laurence. William, he undertakes the academic study in terms of looking at human figures, but he decides it's not really for him. He really wanted to focus on landscape painting, but that was not something at the time that was emphasized that much in the academy. So he turns his attention to places where this is more of a focus. And he and Anna go to the Lauren Artist Colony shortly thereafter, not long thereafter, and that's where they meet a good friend named Jacob Doyaward, among many other artists, such as Joseph Israels, whose painting is up here. This is on view in our Singer Gallery. He was one of these artists working in the Dutch Impressionist style of the Lauren School. And also artists like Anton Malva. So this had a really significant impact on him. There are all these influences that are sort of coming to him. When he and Anna come back to the United States, he will also spend time at the Old Lyme Artist Colony, I believe beginning in 1907. There he will meet people like Childe Hassam. This is our very beautiful and well-known Old House Gloucester that's on view in the museum. And the Old Lyme Artist Colony is in Connecticut. It's along the shoreline. And artists would take their brushes and other materials and sit outside and work en plein air. And there's Childe Hassam, one of the leaders of the American Impressionist style and movement. And you can see the impact in terms of Hassam's style and his work on William, his early works in this period. These beautiful autumn scenes that set the stage for what he's going to do later when he goes to Norway. And here we have Willard Metcalf, who is another important influence on Singer. And he's a friend, ends up traveling with William to Norway in 1913. There he is up there. And Singer was closer to Willard Metcalf than he was to Childe Hassam. He knew Hassam, but not really a close friend from what I've read and what I understand. He became friends more with another artist named Walter Griffin, who worked at the Old Lyme Artist Colony. So all of these influences, Lauren, Old Lyme, as well as trends in European painting, particularly pointillism and post-impressionism, sort of combine to create an impact on Singer. And there, Heather, you were talking before about him working en plein air. He's doing the same thing. This is probably from one of those summers of 1902 to 4. As a young man, he's out there with his panel and brushes, perhaps making something like this landscape with a farm woman that we see here. Really lovely. But really, probably the most significant influence for the works that we're going to show you and talk about a bit more tonight in the exhibition is in post-impressionism and pointillism that was used by artists such as Georges Seurat, or Theo von Reiselberg. And by pointillism, what I mean is these applications of dots of pigments that are used to create this kind of pattern, and that if you get up close to the painting, you can see how they're applied to the canvas. Sometimes they're thick, sometimes they're in these sort of splotches. But what that does is it creates this really interesting optical effect. And it influences Singer's artwork. There's sort of this transition in the late teens to the 20s that he's going to develop to create works like this, showing Alden in springtime once they relocate to Norway. But these were some of his major influences. You also have an artist, Heather and I are both very fond of, named Henri Singer, who became one of his friends, a French sort of neo-impressionist who also used this kind of technique, a little bit looser brushwork though, I think. What helps Singer to be able to become an artist is that at a dinner in 1907, when he and Anna come back to the Pittsburgh area, they are each given, the children of William Henry Sr. are given $4 million each. And how much would that be today, Heather? It's quite a fortune.
Oh, we had fun calculating that, wasn't it? Close to 138 million.
Yes. So that's a sizable amount of money. It's really, with that, he could certainly comfortably paint for the rest of his life, and he and Anna could engage in philanthropic activities. So what starts to happen is William has many different exhibitions as time goes on, and this is one that he had in 1908 at J.J. Gillespie and Company. You may have heard of it, Heather. Pretty well-known gallery, is that correct?
Well, it was, they claimed the first gallery west of the Alleghenies, which is what everything in Pittsburgh is, basically. And also my first job out of college is where I worked at J.J. Gillespie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it's
Oh,
fun
wow.
to see it, you know, that he was involved in that back in the early 1900s. So that was his Pittsburgh, you know, debut, basically, besides the international, but for selling work. Very interesting.
That is really interesting. And I think this really sets the stage for him to receive other numerous exhibitions, which he has so many throughout his career. So this was a good start for him. Those, of course, that were for commercial purposes or focus. And, you know, Singer really exhibits widely. He exhibits in Paris. He has so many shows in America, including before our museum opened in 1928 at the Baltimore Museum of Art. I was reading about that. It was very interesting. He and Jacob Doyeward had a show there. And that was because the museum had not been built yet. And that would have been one of the largest museums in the state at the time, among them. So that was neat to read about. Here are two paintings that are in the exhibition. And we will get to those afterwards, in and around the village of Olden. So essentially what happens after 1908 is Anna and William become expatriates in Europe, and they divide their time between the Netherlands and Norway. Their first trip to Norway was in 1903 at the recommendation of Martin Borgård, but they continue to go back with various people, including Walter Griffin, who goes with them, and then also Willard Metcalf. And they build themselves a beautiful house called the Villa de Wildesvanen, which I believe was their first residence in Laren, which is outside of Amsterdam. And here is a teacup that you have, Heather.
Yes.
Yeah. that shows those three swans on it, and it's really lovely.
I'm not sure why I have that, but I've always had it, and it's fun.
A nice souvenir.
Yeah.
And of course, attached to the villa is the museum that Anna founded in 1956 called the Singer Laren. That's our sister museum. These are some interior shot. This is an interior shot of it showing their collections. And here's also the Hotel Hamdorf, and I believe, isn't that where they stayed before they built the villa?
That's right, yes. And there was an artist colony that also was living there. And so it was a very social time for them before they built the Die Wiedersahnen on where Anna's pictured in her garden. Yeah.
Right there, yes. These are some of Singer's paintings from the Netherlands, down below here. And the relationship between Martin and Anna, there's been quite some speculation on it. In a new biography written in Dutch by Jet Boytje, she has uncovered more evidence that indicates that Martin and Anna had a romantic relationship. And we can see that in the artwork. And I think she's certainly correct here. One called Breastfeeding, probably from the 1910s or 20s. And here she's looking at him. At the time, Martin and William, they're all living together. Martin and William are painting together every day. But unfortunately, Anna, as Yet has determined in her research, suffered a miscarriage around 1914. So this must have been very difficult for her. We don't know who the father was, whether it was perhaps Martin or it could have been William. But this really must have been devastating for her. And you can see that in paintings also done by Jacob Doyeward. At the same time, Doyeward is also visiting in paintings that are in our collection called like the Baby's Layette. And then over here, an interior with cradle, which I believe shows one of her nephews or nieces in this cradle. But this one is very bittersweet as she's looking at this baby's first clothes. It's just a lovely work, but also very bittersweet and sad. It's on display in the museum now in the Singer Gallery. And here are some other works showing William's studio from 1913 and the villa, the Wildeswannen. Later on, they build another house called Nederheim, and that was done in 1937. It's even larger. And there the Singers are able to sort of spread out more. This comes later in life. And this is a really neat photo. Some of the works that are in here, the two sculptures by Ernest Wynants came to our museum for our 1949 edition of The Wise and Foolish Virgins. And also these two Chinese qilins up there. So this is really neat to see the collection, Heather, in situ when you look at these old photos.
Right. It is amazing. And do you have are those Rodins in the center? I know you have John the Baptist, but that doesn't look like that. I mean, their collecting was amazing at the time. I know Anna was very involved in that, what they were collecting.
Yes, the Singers really liked 19th century French art, like Rodin. They also liked the Dutch Lauren artists. They liked Asian art, Chinese art in particular, and also various kinds of decorative arts. They also collected a number of other Dutch artists, Gustave Courbet being another important artist, and then also American artist friends who were expatriates. One of the first books, among the first ones written on Singer, is by an etcher and publisher named R.W.P. de Vries. And this just shows him. Then here's William with his friend, Henri Singer, and this really neat booth photograph of the two of them. He certainly had an impact on him. They spent time together in Paris. And one of those works that's in the exhibition is by that introduces it is by Isidore Opsomer, who was a Belgian artist. This one down here, the portrait of Singer, and there's our director from the 1940s, Jack Kraft, pointing to the portrait. And you can see the artist here, Isidore Opsomer. He is up here with the Singers with those glasses. And a number of their other friends. There's William in the background. There's Jaap Doyeward. And then also, I believe, the mayor and his wife of Antwerp. This was taken in Belgium in, I think, 1939. So they really Anna really had a passion for staying in the Netherlands, particularly Lauren, but also traveling to Belgium. And that's where they met Isidore Opsmer. Also included in the exhibition is Martin Borgård's very interesting portrait of this Norwegian sailor. And then one of his sculptures of a head of a young man. They're very different because one is quite impressionistic. As you look at this, it's sort of about texture. It's about exploring the forms of sculpture, the modeling. We don't have a lot of detail, but here it's quite different, his rendition of this Norwegian sailor. I always find this portrait, Heather, very interesting. I can just spend lots of time in the gallery looking at this man. His face tells us a story of his life.
Oh, it really does. Yeah, and the detail and the palette is amazing. Just something.
And of course, Martin picked a really nice background here, Norwegian countryside.
Yeah.
With the boats as well. Like Martin, an artist, not a household name, but very interesting, named Sigurd Sko, was also born in Norway. And that's one of the reasons I chose this work to include in the show. It's not of Norway itself, but he's Norwegian American and came to settle in America. He worked as an illustrator and did marine scenes. He also did portraits. And it's called Cloudy Coast in Brittany. And it was among the Singer's first part of the 100 founding works of art that we received. Just you can almost feel the sea spray there along the Brittany coast. Just beautiful painting. Similar in style to Singer. Another portrait that's included in the show that's quite different from Opsmer's. And here, before I talk about the one on the left, Opsmer returned to do another one of him in 1938, a beautiful wash drawing that is strikingly similar to the bigger oil portrait. This one being really iconic. He captures the vitality of his friend. And then this one was done a bit later, and that shows William standing in the Norwegian landscape. And he's showing off a cufflink here. This is included in the exhibition by one of their friends named Natalie MacDonald Hall. And a portrait of him from the 1920s. It's really quite lovely. It's very tiny. It's only about this big. And it's watercolor on ivory. So it's very delicate, very light sensitive. But it's just a jewel of a painting. So originally when the Singers arrived in Norway, they sort of start out in the area around Oslo. And William paints the Sandvik River, which is not very far from there, flows near a glacier. And it's really quite beautiful. You and I were talking about this, Heather, how it's so different from the other paintings we're going to see shortly. You have these really loose brush strokes that contrast with his pointillist style that comes later. You can almost feel the water rushing out of the picture here. Entire space. Look at this one. This one looks like a plein air to me. In these early days in the 1910s, he did wonderful sketches. At this time, basically, the Singers are traveling throughout the country, and they go to a place called the Tydal, and they have a cabin that's shown up here on the right. They also go to the Jotunheimen Glacier with Walter Griffin, and this is one of the few paintings in which Singer includes goats. He includes animals. He almost never has people in his works, which is characteristic of his work. It's a focus on nature, to be immersed in it. So here's where Olden is. It's located here, not very far from Bergen. And the Singers' travels took them probably about as far north, I believe, as Trondheim, but not all the way up into these other areas closer to the Arctic. But they certainly saw plenty. And as we go through, we can see his style changing in numerous ways. This is a great photo of him on an expedition as a young man. So we can imagine him going and traveling around the country. And they would stay in cabins like this one, which is it's not too far from Olden, in a place called Hinsiter. And that's Anna. So she would accompany him on some of these expeditions. And this is really neat to see Singer painting in the early 1910s, the summer evening, right alongside Willard Metcalf. So beautiful. And in many ways, Metcalf was a mentor to him. He influenced his style, his use of these, at least at this time, the use of the loose brush strokes.
So also the square canvas, one of those things that Billy took on actually from Willard was the complete square canvas, which is unusual.
Yes, most of the paintings that you see in the exhibition, as Heather was saying, they use this square format. And this was something that gallerists, to my understanding, favored. It was something very sellable, I think, in terms of display, both gallery and perhaps also domestic. But it was very much in favor at this time, for landscape anyway. And what they do by, I believe it was early 1920s, they build themselves a house. They settle upon Olden as the place they're going to stay, at a place called Dalheim, or it's now named Singerheimen. And William builds himself a studio, and he and Anna have a house. They build themselves a house. And I believe the architect I was reading is very interesting. I think he designed Edvard Grieg's house, the famous composer, which was a neat piece of information. The name of the architect is escaping me at the moment, but he was of note. And you visited here before, Heather, is that correct?
Yes, I was lucky enough to go there when I was much younger, and I would really love to go back. I'm following it on Instagram right now. It's a lovely, it's a B&B that's functioning, but it was such a expanding my world visit to go there and to learn about his art, and then to go where he lived in Holland and Norway when I was a younger person. Been back to Holland several times, but flew to Norway once. It was amazing.
And at least until recently, a number of the furnishings were preserved. I believe that some of them are. It's now become an Airbnb, is that correct?
Yes, yes. It's a national trust, their national trust. I think it's protected under that at this point, but an Airbnb. And it was a functioning farm. I mean, literally with cream and eggs and all sorts of vegetable gardens and things like that.
Yes, and the Singers maintained their own staff. They had their own servants, and they had a very nice relationship with the locals. And these are some historic pictures of how it looked many years ago. And that's a view out of the what became a dining room. I've never gone there, but it is on my list to go and see these places at some point in the future. We can imagine in this setting, Singer receiving such inspiration to create beautiful pastels like Springtime in Norway, this is really lovely. It's so peaceful, and it includes that motif of the tree. And here's this one over here, Heather, that is in your collection.
It's right nearby, yeah. And that what I love about his pastels that I find amazing is that I call it the resist, like in a watercolor where they're using the color of the paper to come through. But I love, so he's using brown paper, and you can see how he's sketching with pastel with white and green and blue, and he blends them together, but uses the sky comes through with the brown paper. This is particularly one of my favorites. And the famous birch tree in the foreground there, and also the one on the left, the evergreen. Seems like he concentrated on those two species of trees. Winter was often the evergreen in this case, and then the birch also. So beautiful pieces, I think. I just love the way he uses the sky, the brown paper that you can see where he's left it purposely, sketching, and just beautiful rendition.
Exactly. He allows the material to surface, if you will, and to work with those colors. And of course, pastels are very delicate, and they're light sensitive, sensitive to changes in conditions, much more so than an oil painting. So these are really just treasures. Here's another one in the exhibition, paired with his friend Griffin's Autumn Afternoon at Boigneville, a French subject. But again, the two of them enjoyed looking at nature and at trees. While difficult to see, there's actually a human figure under one of these trees. I think the figure is over here or over there. I'm sorry, I don't have a better photograph. But Griffin signs did include figures, not for William, though. Our attention is centered straight on the landscape itself. And exactly, Heather, here you have the brown paper. It's surfacing again, and it's merging with the entire composition.
And a comment about his titles too. I always love their kind of, they're very spiritual. They're not definitive. Peace divine, like we don't know exactly where this valley that he's always painting and sketching in, but this is interesting. The titles, Old Viking, some of the others you have, the Birth of a Cloud. I mean, some of them we'll see in your exhibit, but they're just interesting to me, the way he is spiritual in his own way, through his art.
Yes. As we continue on, I should mention that at a certain point, I believe it's in the late 1910s, Martin Borgord has sort of a falling out with the Singers, or parting of ways, and he comes back to the United States and goes to Riverside, California. And Jaap Doyevaart moves in with the Singers on a sort of a semi-permanent basis. And he depicts Anna and spends lots of time with her. They likely had a romantic relationship. If not, it was an emotional one. But he was a close friend. And here he is depicting her at Dalheim in the evening. This is in the Singer-Laren Museum. It's just beautiful, though. His style actually, he was influenced by William, and then William sort of influenced him. There are these counter influences. They also paint together. But it's really neat to see them painting the house, and here they are all together with the dog Lila on their terrace at Dalheim. 1925, right around the time these paintings were done. He spends a lot of time with them. And there's Singer painting outside. This work is not in the exhibition, but it's on view in the museum. Again, using that title, Heather, The Peace of Sleeping Nature. It's very poetic and suggestive, but we don't know exactly sort of what he's getting at. He leaves that up to us.
That's well said.
We have displayed in the exhibition a couple of those calendar illustrations. Actually, before that, they were independent drawings. The one up here, August 21 to September 3rd, is on view in the show, and it shows a watermill. It's beautiful, lovely. As well as December 25th through January 7th. I love how, again, Heather uses the paper to his advantage here to show the snowflakes falling.
And how difficult it is to create these en grisaille. So they're monochromatic, but he still captures the various levels of the snow and the trees and the meadows. And you've exhibited them so beautifully, Daniel, in the vitrine there at the museum. It's a treat as part of the exhibit.
Thank you. I really am very fond of these works. They're so beautiful. September 18th to October 1 is another one of my favorites here with the rainbow. And you and I were talking about this, the unlocated God's promise, which gets much more spiritual. Also, yeah. Nature's God Made It from 1926. These really are sort of showing this, how Singer is looking back to a romantic tradition. You see, like in Friedrich's painting here, mountain landscape with rainbow. of the rainbow as a symbol of hope, but also finding spirituality and perhaps seeking some kind of a communication with God through nature. Not necessarily Christian. It could be something else. And, as preparing the exhibition, one thing that I read about was that Helen Tretlin has researched is that Singer frequently drew inspiration from American New Thought philosophy, particularly Horatio Dresser's Power of Silence, which was published in 1895. And a couple of quotations that Singer had highlighted included, "What a pleasure it is to view nature with an ever deepening consciousness of this divine background." Or, "When standing near some grand mountain or when looking far into the clouds of sunset, we seem to perceive the strength and the vanishing glory of him," capitalized. So I think that some of this philosophy was inspiring Singer, for sure. And another argument that was made some years ago by a number of people, Bob Pressler and I believe William Gertz, is that, and I agree with them, is that at heart, it's interesting because Singer is an impressionist, but at heart, I find him to be a romantic, quintessentially romantic, because he's looking at majestic nature and grand mountains and fjords and all these things that overpower us, that are sort of elicit emotional responses, which you don't see always with impressionist artwork and impressionist painters. This is majestic. It's so grand, the birth of a cloud. Look at the waterfall coming out of the glacier. This is in the exhibition. Or the fleeting atmospheric effects of a rainstorm passing through the valley with sun and rain, and a fall and autumn scene. Just stunning colors. When you come to the exhibition, you will also see that we've grouped them according to themed seasons. So we have the autumn ones together with autumn and summer with summer. Other sources of inspiration that were important for William were the writings of Henry David Thoreau. They were particularly significant for him, in addition to the American New Thought movement. So he had in his library, and Helen Tretlin found these, where he's actually circled and underlined these various passages. So I found this to also be very interesting, and that is definitely within the Romantic tradition. So quite interesting. The winter scenes, it was quite well known that William had written this down, that winter was his favorite season. It was one in which he could have absolute solitude. And this is something that he really focused on in his work, like Norway's Golden Sun, Winter Morning, that's in the exhibition. And then you can also see that with Jakob Doyaward over here, his Olden Norway, when he went to visit them in Olden. And these are just beautiful, so still. When you and I, Heather, were in the gallery talking about this, there's no wind. It looks like it's dawn, and it's so still, just some smoke coming from a chimney.
Beautiful.
They're just wonderful paintings.
Stunning.
In terms of the square frame, these are some of those. We see here the Dream Harbor. We had this painting conserved especially for the exhibition, and it's been revarnished and totally cleaned, and you really can see those snowflakes now. So,
I love the way the buildings reflect in the water too. I mean, just magnificent. So lovely to see it back to its original condition.
yes. This is one that is in your collection. It's really beautiful. It's very still, like the Winter Morning we saw. It's lovely.
I had a little print of a similar scene of this next to my bed when I was growing up. So when I saw this, I was so pleased to, I don't know whether you remember the Sotheby arcade auctions. They kind of had lesser paintings sometimes in there, and I was able to get it. So I was very pleased. It's a beautiful piece. Nobody else bid on it. I was the only one who bid on it.
Way to go.
Thank you.
Yes. Good find.
Yeah. This is also the frames we were talking about too. I don't know, a lot of the pieces that I believe came from Lauren have this eggshell coloring on them. And I know we've talked in the past about the Newcomb Macklin frames. We passed a few of those that were attributed. We're not certain of them, but possibly this one on the gold one. But the eggshell ones are curious. It seems like a lot of his images that came from the Holland Museum had that frame on with that coloring. Which is, I think it's nice because it lets the painting speak for itself. But these gold ones, you can't beat those either. So they're beautiful.
Yes. Each of them suits the work, and it was very likely that, as you and I were talking, that his dealer Franz Buffa, who was based in Amsterdam, probably selected these for him and had that done for him.
That's right. Yeah. I know later his Jaapie Duywaard's brother Wilhelm was dealing in William's estate. So I did meet him when I was younger and visiting Holland, but I'm not sure. So maybe he took over for Franz Buffa or just carried on from Jaapie, his brother that lived with them. But Wilhelm was definitely managing some of Singer's paintings at the time.
Interesting. So we also have in the exhibition summer represented by our river in summer, which we used for a number of the marketing materials. And this is beautiful. It's one of those paintings where that water is cool and refreshing and almost comes out of the canvas into our space. And the sun's last rays is paired with it. It's really beautiful from 1930. I should mention that in the Hagerstown Museum, the paintings that we have are exclusively of Norway, and that's one of the sources of inspiration for this. And what's special about our collection of Singer's artwork is it's only Norway, whereas in Singer Larn, they have a mixture of different things. They have things from his time in America, in Norway, and also the Netherlands, and in some other places. But the summertime ones show how fascinated he was by the Clova and the Cecilia Cruna, which is shown here on the right. These are these mountain peaks that were not too far from Olden. Just stunning, soaring mountains. June morning, and I believe this is in the collection of one of your relatives, right, Heather?
Correct.
Yes. Where we have a feast for our eyes and the wildflowers in the foreground, which is something that William really favored. Just lovely. I do see that we're about 7:05, so I'm going to continue on here so that we have enough time for questions. But you did this neat show in 2000, Heather, A Brush with History. Tell us a little bit about that.
That was my brother Harton, who is named for William Henry Singer's. His mother's name was Hester Laird Harton, so my brother's name is Harton. But we cobbled together about 25 to 30 singers from the area and relatives, and did an exhibit. Other artists from the Swickley Valley area, and we did a wide span. I mean, it was from the 1800s through the present, but the bulk of the exhibit was the Singer painting. So that was really fun, and one of the first time that his work had been shown en masse here, since in the 20s, and when he was at Gillespie's, that cover that you showed so well. Here's some pastels that you can, as you said, in the seasons. So you've got the winter and the spring and the summer, and fall actually. Yeah. So it was a fun exhibit, and we enjoyed doing it. Got a lot of people interested in Singer again.
It's really lovely. And this one that is in your family's collection is also really nicely paired with the two that are in the show, Sun and Rain, and then October Showers. Just
The one on the left is was given to my parents by Anna. They went to see her in Norway after the war, so it was the late 40s, early 50s, and at that time they gave her this paint. Anna gave my parents this painting, so it's fun to have it in the family and know that it came directly from Anna.
It's a really neat connection. So I do see that coming up on a little bit later here. So I'm just going to also mention that when you come to the exhibition, there's another artist who's very important in the show in terms of the Norwegian and Norse connection. His name is Frank Morse Rummel, and he's not a household name. He was the great grandson of Samuel F.B. Morse, who famously invented Morse code on his mother's side. So he has some interesting family connections, but like Singer, he was fascinated by people from Scandinavia. And here we have a painting on the left that he did that starts the Morse Rummel section called Figure Walking on Snow that was conserved. And he was fascinated by the Sami people who live in northern Scandinavia. This one is one of those Sami people walking on a snowy hillside. He did some of these prints that you see here at the British Museum, sort of head studies, figure studies of these people. And that's quite different from this large series of Norse mythological subjects that are in the exhibition. Now, I don't have time tonight to go into all of these in detail, but they're really quite intriguing. They essentially, Frank Morse Rummel became fascinated by Nordic mythology. He did some traveling around Europe. He spent most of his life in Paris. He was a British national, but his father was German, mother American. And he became fascinated by Norse mythology, the gods, and particularly a poem called the Poetic Edda. And in this, a Vövla, or a prophetess, relays to the god Odin, who's the leader of the gods, basically his fate and that of the world. And in this poem, in the Poetic Edda, she tells of the birth of the world. It's the struggles between different gods and the destruction of the universe as a whole in an event called Ragnarok, which is very well known now in popular culture. And then how it is after that destruction, it's reborn, it's reincarnated. And these are a really interesting series of watercolors. So if you have a chance to come to the show, I encourage you to see them. They have various texts attached to them. And I have, in certain places where pertinent, I have taken excerpts from the text to show those relationships. So here, basically, what she's doing is she's telling Odin what the future is going to be. And then she tells that he's going to have to sacrifice an eye to a giant if he wishes to receive knowledge. So that's how it begins. And the series continues with describing places like Gunungagap, the fates who predict the future, who spin the destiny of humans and gods. And also the poem talks about the dwarfs. And what's really interesting about this series is that it encourages the viewer to look more at how can we imagine this poem rather than it being a one-to-one correlation or relationship. In other words, the text is not as specifically detailed as earlier depictions like this one that you see on the left here, where it's very clear what's going on. Morse Rummel is sort of the symbolist post-impressionist artist who wants us to think of these various myths, and he interprets the poem very abstractly, the poem itself being very ambiguous. And this is the first time, to my knowledge, that these have been interpreted in considerable depth. So this was the other half of research that I did in preparing the exhibition. And there, as I mentioned, there are 13 of these. They're about this big, and they're all framed. And they follow these various stories. The death of Baldr, which is instigated by the evil god Loki, Loki's punishment, a discussion of what it's like down in hell, and then the beginnings of what will be the Ragnarok, or the battle between gods and giants in which they annihilate each other. Just beautiful use of color and form. And then, of course, there's this destruction and a rebirth of what gives rise to essentially a new race of people, and the survival of only a few gods. So that's kind of the series in a nutshell.
May I just say that it will be an exciting part of your visit to this exhibit to see Daniel's research and meticulous writing and design and layout of this. It's the most beautiful folio, and it's really a treat to read about this, and his research into the Norse gods and stories is unbelievable. So you have a treat in store for you if you can get to this exhibit and see it. It's amazing.
Thank you, Heather. It's really been fascinating working on these. It was my first time looking at Norse mythology in any detail. And we're not sure exactly why Morse Rummel painted this series. He labeled them as mural studies, leading us to believe he had some kind of civic or perhaps a private commission in mind, but we don't know for certain. So that remains a mystery, but I'm very happy that we have these. And they were a gift of Anna and William. What's interesting is that Frank Morse Rummel actually went with his wife, Marta Holm, who was Swedish, to visit the Singers at Dalheim in 1936. And I believe that is when he gave the 13 watercolors to them as a gift. And then subsequently they decided they wanted to donate them to the museum. So they kind of have a neat story there. And in wrapping up, I just would like to say that, the Singers were really important in Norway. As you mentioned before, Heather, the construction of the road between Olden and Invik is paid for by the Singers. And the people were very thankful.
We think that it cost them about $120,000, which would be about $2 million today, because they had to blast through the side of the road there make the tunnels. It was a trip that would take 6 hours by boat to get to the hospital, and because of the road, it took 3 hours. And sadly, when Billy passed, and you'll probably speak about this, but he was unable to use that road because he was under house arrest by the Nazis during World War II to get to the hospitals.
Here, King Haakon VII of Norway is presenting William with the Order of St. Olav. It was part of a ceremony that this was really, the Singers did quite a service to the local community. And as you had mentioned, did I have a photo of that? Let me just see. At the end, they also donated money for a hospital as part of their philanthropic activities. But as Heather was saying, once we got to World War II, it was the Nazis occupied it, and the Singers are placed under house arrest. So those years were very difficult. It's a time of great stress. And from what I read, there was also an anecdote, probably true, that the Gestapo actually wanted to arrest Anna, but the townspeople spoke up on her behalf and said, "We've done nothing to bother you at all. We've been cooperative since your occupation. You're going to have trouble if you take her in." And it was very interesting reading about this. The Gestapo actually backed off. They did not continue and arrest her. But as things are told, William dies of a heart attack in 1943. In some of those late works, he feels very alone and isolated, as you can see here in some of these last pieces. And then after his death, she leaves behind money for the 1949 edition of the museum. So a great legacy with the Singer-Laren Museum. And then they are buried in this beautiful chapel at Dalheim. So there, it looks like we have a couple of questions. Yes, from Paulette Lee. And if anybody else has any questions, feel free to ask them, put them in the chat. She's asking, what is the connection or the segue between the tree in Norse mythology and its connection? It connects the 9 worlds. And she's asking, did Singer use, or was he aware of any Norse mythology? Okay, and then I'll get to her second question in a moment. That's an interesting question, Paulette, because, you know, when I was writing the labels for the exhibition, this really occurred to me. I'll go back a slide or two here. And the tree, sort of, let me see if I can find it and I can show it to you. I think that William was aware of this motif. Here's the slide. As part of Frank Morris Rummel's series, he did Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is the life-giving tree. It gives birth to the entire universe. And I think this may have been in Singer's consciousness at the time, because he really focuses on this a lot. And, you know, feel free to comment, Heather. I think that this has some symbolic importance to the artist. I think he would have definitely known about Yggdrasil even before Morse Rummel did this. And also the title that you had mentioned too, An Old Viking, which it doesn't have to do with mythology, but it has to do with the cultural identity of Norwegian people and other Nordic peoples. So yes, I do believe that we have a connection there. And I think he's trying to elicit that, this sense of spirituality that the tree gives forth or brings forth life. And I would read that as part of his work.
And I think that parallels your description of the one of the portfolio of 13 by Morse Rummel about the 2 trees. So that will be part of the exhibit that I think people would enjoy too, to see where you're talking about the 2 trees that are illustrated. Yeah, and then as you told me, Daniel, this later, that William Singer, as he became older, he concentrated on the tree in the foreground, where before it was part of the more, like these 2 are samples, would be more mountainous in the background, and a valley and a river and a road. But as he aged, he became you know, more concentrating on the tree in the foreground. And then this last piece is very light palette. We probably should have mentioned he never worked with a primed canvas. He worked on raw canvas. So this on the right shows that in particular.
Exactly. He painted right onto that canvas. And the tree really is, he's just fascinated with it. It's also this element of that it can sustain the weathering of time and of nature, and that it remains there. It's fixed to the Norwegian landscape. It's fixed to the identity. And Paulette asked, why were they under house arrest? That was because they were, my terminology may not be entirely correct, they were enemy aliens abroad, meaning that because they were American in Nazi-occupied territory, they had to comply with the laws of Nazis at the time. So that's how my best answer for that. And I think this happened to other Americans too at the time. Another interesting thing, Paulette, just to sort of elaborate that on a little bit, the Nazis had actually, the Gestapo wanted to confiscate Dalheim, but because the Singers, once the war started in 41, their money, their access to their bank accounts in America was cut off, so the money wasn't able to be sent over. They had to mortgage Dalheim in order to be able to pay the servants and keep things going. So with that mortgage on the property, the Gestapo couldn't get their hands on it, at least according to what I had read in the museum's 1981 catalog. So we have another question. It's asking, do we know who William studied with in Pittsburgh when he was young? Yes, he studied with Martin Borgard. Now, Heather, there might have been another teacher at the Allegheny Art School, or maybe one of the members of the Scalp level, but I don't know if that part was documented in addition to Martin.
I'm not familiar with it, Daniel. You would know more than I would, but I just the board connection is prominent and written about, and
Yeah. And then we had another person who wanted to thank us so much for the discussion, and they enjoyed visiting the exhibit. Well, thank you very much for attending tonight and joining us, and also seeing the exhibition. And for, we encourage anybody else who hasn't gone to come and see it and enjoy it. It's up through September 17th. So I will look to see if there are any other questions. If anybody has anything else, feel free to add it in. We were asked, is anybody planning a trip to Norway? I wish I were. Still busy at the moment. How about you, Heather?
Let's go. I think life is too short. We ought to make our way over there some summer and enjoy it and just to see it. It would be great.
Yes. I really now want to go to Norway at some point, especially after being immersed in William's paintings and his friends.
Oh, Daniel, you should definitely, all the research you did on that portfolio it would mean so much to you, especially knowing all those details. So
yes.
That would be great.
We'll have to plan that at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Heather. And thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I'm so happy you were able to come. And we encourage you, as we mentioned before, to come to the show and to experience the wonderful work of William Singer and his contemporaries. So, thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciated being a part of your PowerPoint. It was amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I really enjoyed your commentary and insights, Heather. This was really interesting and insightful and illuminating. So
thank you. Thank you.
Another relative has written in that they are planning a trip over to Norway. So, and they are very happy to see us here on Zoom. So thank you very much, Anne. It's very kind of you.
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much. And we hope you have a very nice and enjoyable summer. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you attending.
Take care
now. Daniel. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yep.